Welcome to the Own It Powercast, the place to be when you get serious about making big changes and accelerating growth in your life and in your relationships. Finally create the life you've always wanted, living life on your own terms. Learn how to take your fear and turn it into powerful choices that will create sustained change. Now your host, Mary Baker.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Own It Powercast, the place to come to get what you need to move yourself forward. Hey, it's Mary Baker, and welcome to episode 283. You're not broken, you're in a loop. Well, welcome back as we're going to finish out this month all about our self-concept, and how we're showing up in our lives. And we've been talking about shame as well because I think it can be such a huge factor in how we see ourselves and how we operate. So this week on the podcast, we're talking about a powerful force that shows up in our lives more often than we realize. It influences how we speak, how we see ourselves, and how much space we allow ourselves to take up. So if you've ever felt uncomfortable after saying no, uneasy when someone compliments you, or guilty for just putting yourself first, that quiet discomfort isn't random. It's something deeper. But before we get into that, I want to remind you that if you need more help around this stuff, around getting healthier, and you want to work on your shame and you want a solution-focused positive approach, look in the show notes for the links to the courses that I have to offer. Everything from a free ebook on boundaries to a 3-part masterclass you can do pretty quickly, to the 6-month course, Find Your Voice, which is online, self-paced, plus a group coaching aspect and one-on-one support with me. And if you just want to talk about what you need to work on, sign up for a power hour with me. We can figure that out. All right, so let's get into it. So today, I want to unpack something that quietly runs so many of our habits and choices. Shame. Not the loud, obvious kind, but the kind we've been talking about the last couple weeks, like the kind that hides underneath our perfectionism, our procrastination, and, of course, our people-pleasing. And it's the kind that keeps us in cycles that we don't want to be in, but somehow feel stuck inside of. And that's why I call it the loop. So shame creates the very problem we're trying to avoid. So let's take a closer look at what I mean by this loop and how it actually plays out. Because once you can see it clearly, I think it becomes easier to interrupt it. So first of all, you feel pressure to get it right. It starts with that internal or maybe external pressure, like maybe it's a deadline, a hard conversation you need to have, a creative project, or even just a decision you have to make. Well, the pressure feels really heavy, and underneath of it is the belief that if I don't do this perfectly, I'll mess everything up. People will be disappointed. I'll disappoint myself. And you may not even realize these are things that you believe. But this isn't just about high standards. It's about fearing the emotional fallout of getting it wrong. Another example is, let's say you're afraid of failing. Well, shame's going to kick in before you even begin. The fear of failure isn't just about the task. It's about what failure would mean about you as a person. Shame is about who we are. And it enters the scene, I think, quietly but so powerfully, and it just whispers to you, oftentimes subconsciously, saying things like, yeah, you're not really good enough for this. You're going to fall on your face. You're going to look stupid. Why even try? Every other time you've tried, you've failed. This is when and how shame starts to preemptively protect you. And it's trying to protect you from perceived harm. It does that by creating anxiety and doubt and overwhelm. Your body tightens, your motivation drops. And you know the task starts to feel bigger and heavier than it really is. So if you ever find yourself making something bigger than it needs to be, making a mountain out of a molehill. This is part of the reason why that's happening. You're trying to protect yourself. What about if you procrastinate, you over-prepare, or you avoid? So what's happening is in response to that internal shame spiral, your nervous system shifts into a coping pattern. Maybe you procrastinate because starting feels way too vulnerable. You're putting yourself out there to be judged, to fail, to be abandoned, to be disappointed. Maybe you over-prepare, over-plan, deep down believing you have to be perfect for it to be worthy. Or maybe you avoid the situation altogether, choosing short-term relief over that long-term resolution. So this stage often feels like you're the problem. You're lazy, you're scattered, you're unmotivated. But the truth is, you're not unmotivated, you're scared. And you're in self-protection mode. So now you feel even worse, and that just creates more shame. Here's part of the loop. Avoiding or delaying, of course, may bring you temporary relief, but now the consequences start to build, right? Missed opportunities, mounting pressure, and damaged self-trust. And guess who shows back up? Shame. Only this time it's louder. It says, why can't you just get it together? You always do this. What's wrong with you? And so the loop tightens. And that's what's really important to remember. It tightens. And the shame that caused the inaction in the first place now punishes you for it. So you feel stuck, you feel defeated, and you feel ashamed all over again. But here's the thing. This loop doesn't mean you're broken. It means your nervous system is just trying to keep you safe from perceived danger, even if that danger is just the possibility of judgment, failure, or not being enough. But once you can name the pattern and meet it with some self-compassion and understanding instead of criticism, you start to create a space to make a different choice. Once you can grab context and stop making it about you as a person, then you can be a good person who just struggles with a coping mechanism that's not working for you. Because remember, it's not that you're lazy. It's that your nervous system is just trying to protect you from feeling the shame that's attached to getting it wrong. So I want you to tie in that perfectionism is a defense. And it tells you, if I do it perfectly, maybe I won't feel bad. And that procrastination is just avoidance. If I don't try, I won't fail and it won't have to feel awful. I won't have to have that conversation and have someone really upset with me and then I don't know how to handle my feelings. And then your people pleasing is protection. If I just make sure everyone's happy with me, maybe I'll be safe. But here's the thing. It's a burnout loop. And the loop is sneaky because on the surface, it can look like you're just being kind. You're being helpful. You're the dependable one. You're the planner. You like to get things just right. You're the high achiever. But underneath, there's often that shame quietly calling the shots. Here are some of the costs associated with this loop. The obvious one is you're going to overextend because you need to avoid disapproval. So you say yes when you really mean no. You volunteer when you're already drained. You don't speak up when something doesn't work for you because the idea of disappointing someone feels unbearable. And I also want to stop here and say a lot of people share with me that if they come back and say, I'm so sorry, I can't help you this week, or I can't do that thing, they're afraid of conflict. They're afraid of that all of a sudden the other person is not going to be okay with them. And they're not sure how to handle that because I think they haven't done the boundary work yet. mean, that's what you're going to work on with a coach or a therapist around. How do you do this? How do you do this in a really healthy and loving way where you're in a place of choice and they're in a place of choice? But deep down, you might have this belief that says, if I let them down, they're not going to like me anymore. If I don't show up for them, I'm not enough. Because again, your worth, or more of your worth than you realized, is conditional upon maybe what you do for others or what you are for them, as opposed to just who you are. This isn't just people pleasing. I think it's shame-fueled people pleasing. And again, it's rooted in the fear that your worth is somehow conditional. And that came from growing up. We've talked about it many times here on the podcast. And it's a hard pill to swallow, but very worth it work to go back and heal some of that. Another part of the burnout from the loop is you start to feel resentful, exhausted, unseen, because over time, the cost really adds up. If you're constantly prioritizing others at your own expense, you start to feel burned out, not just physically, but emotionally. You might notice thoughts like, no one even sees how much I'm carrying. Why do I always have to be the strong one? Does anyone even notice how hard I'm trying? Do they even appreciate me? Now, you're probably not saying these things out loud, but they're sitting heavy in the background. And that resentment can only grow. And we're resentful of them because we're not taking care of ourselves. Because we don't know yet that we can. And then shame creeps in, of course. So eventually you hit a breaking point, or maybe just a moment of self-awareness, and it doesn't feel good. But instead of grace, shame takes over. So now you start beating yourself up and saying, why can't I say no? I know better than this. What is wrong with me? I always do this. I ruin my own peace. So this moment right here is where shame replaces curiosity. Shame replaces self-love and understanding. Because instead of asking yourself something like, what do I need? Wow. You start to question yourself. Instead of looking at it being the situation that you're caught up in. So what do? To feel better, you just double down on helping or fixing, because you got to run away from the shame somehow, right? So to soothe that discomfort, you do what you've always done. You try harder. You offer more. You step in faster. You sacrifice deeper. Because people-pleasing has always been your way of maintaining connection. And this is the sad part. That connection feels like safety, but it's not. Each time you overextend yourself to feel better, you'll lose a little more of yourself. And this reinforces the belief that you're only valuable when you're useful and when you're agreeable or when you're giving. And so the loop continues. This is how people-pleasing and burnout becomes cyclical. The shame of not being able to say no leads to more yeses, which leads to more burnout and back to shame again. But this isn't about weakness. I'm hoping you see by now it's about survival. People-pleasing is how many of us just learned how to stay safe. It was the strategy that kept us in relationships, kept us from conflict, kept us from being rejected, maybe even harmed. But now as adults, it's our work to begin asking, is this actually who I am? Or is this a pattern that I just learned to stay safe and the real me is deep down in there? Now let's talk about why awareness and compassion are game changers. Here's the truth. You can't interrupt a loop you don't recognize because you're just doing it unconsciously. Because if you're stuck in a pattern, whether it's overthinking, whether you're avoiding, snapping, or overextending, and you don't understand what's underneath it, you're just going to keep blaming yourself instead of naming the pattern for what it is. Shame loves to stay hidden. It thrives in silence and judgment, as Brené Brown talks about. She calls it secrecy and silence. But awareness? I think awareness is a light switch. I really do. Because the moment you name what's happening without judgment, you create space for something new. You put yourself in a place of choice all of a sudden. And you don't make it about you as a person. You're like, look at that. So let's walk through what compassionate awareness can sound like in real time. You can say things like, this is the shame loop again. Of course it's hard to get started. I'm just struggling with that. I feel the urge to procrastinate. What am I afraid will happen if I try and it's not perfect? I want to say yes right now, but what would a boundary look like instead? And why would that be so much better for everyone involved? I'm falling into the people pleasing again. What am I trying to protect myself from? Where do I not feel safe? So these aren't just mental exercises. I think they're interruptions. And they're important ones because they stop that automatic, unconscious cycle of shame and avoidance. And I think they open the door to curiosity. And remember, curiosity is usually the beginning of change. So I want you to know that you're not the only one, that everyone has some version of these loops. And there's a continuum, I think. And we all have coping strategies we develop to feel safe, to feel liked, to feel worthy. And these patterns are common, but they don't have to define you. Because the moment you can look at a pattern and say, I see you, I know why you're here, but I don't need you in the same way anymore. I can do brave things. You don't have to fight shame. You don't have to bully yourself into change. You really can't. Instead, you can notice, you can name, and you can nurture instead. And you can take it off of the real you and understand the context that you just developed this loop to cope. But then the coping skills take on a life of their own, like we talked about today. And they create more problems for you, and they keep you stuck. A loop keeps you stuck. You keep going round and round and round. And the answer is to start breaking the pattern so you can get out. So here are some questions I want you to think about. The first one is, where do you think shame shows up most often in your life? The second one, what loop do you find yourself repeating again and again? What are the pieces to that loop? That may take you some time to think about, and that's okay. But what loop do you find yourself repeating again and again? And third, what would self-compassion sound like in that moment instead? So today we talked about how we all have patterns we wish we could break. Procrastination, people-pleasing, perfectionism. But what if the real reason we stay stuck isn't what we think? And so today we talked about how that quiet, powerful force behind so many of these cycles is really shame. And it's not the kind that shouts, but the kind that whispers just enough to keep us second-guessing ourselves, over-functioning for others, and usually avoiding things we care about. So we talked about how shining the light on these loops that can really keep us stuck, and how offering a more compassionate lens to understand them can help us begin to change. Instead of jumping back in the loop and pushing ourselves with just more pressure or more self-blame. Because we want to find a new way of relating to ourselves in those hard moments, because that's when change begins. So if today's episode resonated with you, I really encourage you to start noticing with love and compassion where these shame loops show up in your life, where you feel stuck, and not to judge it, but just to recognize it again as a protective response. You're not broken, you're not too much, or not enough. You're just stuck. You're stuck in the loops that only you can change with some help. And if you want some help with that, take a look at my Find Your Voice program, because that's why I designed it. We break down how to set boundaries, how to work on healing yourself, how to become more assertive, how to understand yourself and your values and your beliefs and your gifts and your passions. Because you can't do this work alone. You can recognize that you have a problem, but doing this work, we need that belonging and acceptance and guidance and support. And that's why I've created the programs that I have, because I've seen them work for people. Thank you so much for being here today. I hope this episode helped you look at maybe why you're stuck sometimes. If you'd like to get the newsletter, check it out at ownitpowercast.com or find me on Substack. I'm right there. Great community over there. All right, so pay it forward, keep focusing on you, and I'll see you next time.
We hope you took away some useful insights and tools you can begin using right away. If you did, please leave a positive review and share on your social media. Because could you imagine if everyone in your life really got it together? Remember, own it now, so you can really own it later.